As long as there is volatility in the market, there will be definitely interest for more advanced traders. What we now see is as well quite a lot of interest from institutional market players. Before MiCA, crypto was something that institutional players were a little bit more conservative towards in terms of approach, a little bit more wait and see. Now, because Europe legitimized crypto and the digital asset as a financial instrument, we see now a little bit of a hockey stick growth in institutional interest.
Start by introducing yourself.
Hi, Phil. Yes, I'm Erald. I'm the CEO of OKX in Europe, and I've been leading the European expansion program for OKX since the last 3 years.
Yeah, and maybe starting with economics. So how is the current economic sentiment in Europe, maybe in general? And how do you see the behavior of users changing in Europe?
From a market point of view, I think it's quite well known to all the listeners and viewers. We're a little bit in a bear market at the moment. Prices are quite low, the lowest that we've seen them in the last 2 years. That, of course, also results into what we've observed in the last 2 weeks, less of retail interest. Since the positive information that is now coming out of the US, since these new bills and laws might being closer to be signed in, we do again see a little bit more retail interest and market excitement happening, even in Europe on this side of the Atlantic, bringing it a little bit closer to Europe on a regulatory front. As most of you might be aware, MiCA has now been in the frameworks since January last year. The end of the grandfathering period of MiCA, or the end of the transition period, so to say, will happen this year in a few months in July. That means also that those industry participants who have not obtained the MiCA license before July, they will probably have to stop operations in the local European markets. And those users will then probably also need to find some other home for their beloved crypto. That is something that is also playing quite strong in Europe, where we also are seeing more and more of the competitors, of our industry competitors, getting nervous. That itself translates into some competitors who don't believe that they will be able to be MiCA compliant by the deadline, or now looking for ways out. Those ways out can be fully acquisition, buying over their portfolio. So I think in the next few months, there might be also more news and information coming out about mergers, companies converging with each other, companies leaving the European market altogether. So in that sense, I think the next few months up until Q3 in 2026 will be quite eventful in terms of the crypto scene in Europe. So that's a little bit what I see is what's living in Europe. Market sentiment, retail, relatively conservative given the market conditions. But then for the rest of the year, I think with MiCA deadline approaching, I think there will be very interesting news happening throughout Europe.
Yeah, and I think you already said something very important with MiCA going live, or maybe already going live with some regulations. Maybe talking about the current bear market a bit. So do you see that maybe the users are currently using crypto as some kind of hedge, maybe against a crisis of, let's say, dollar or euro, or maybe also for payments more? So is there an increase in these interests?
We now, because of market conditions, obviously, we see less hedging, even though the macroeconomic and global tensions that are rising, we do feel much less of that. Where we do see a significant uptick is in the interest and in the use cases for real user functionality, real life use cases. Hence why we're also now doubling down on our OKX Pay and our OKX Card to widen and broaden our product functionality when it comes to serving users with their 3 financial needs that they have in their life. So the 3 financial needs that anybody will ever have in their life is the first one, in order to pay and to get paid. So this is what we're building our OKX Pay and Card function for, so that people can go to the grocery shop, pay for their groceries, buy a coffee, stuff like that, receive funds from family and friends for birthday or whatever. So this is where OKX now in Europe tailored their pay and card function for. The second financial use case that somebody can have is to accrue wealth. People throughout their life, they want to earn interest on their savings. They want to invest in order to build up and grow their wealth and their capital. That's the second use case. The third use case is something that, let's say, 90 or 95% of the population will ever encounter, and that is to borrow or to lend. Most of us, we at some moment in time will need to borrow for a house, to get a mortgage, or for a car, or for a new dishwasher. So for all of those three financial needs, we are now at OKX in Europe building functional products and services. Now, where we now in Europe see the most uptick and interest is, of course, on the payment. Stablecoin payment through our OKX Pay, but also through our OKX Card. For that, we recently, I think it was last week, we announced that we achieved or obtained our PI license. That stands for the Payment Institution License. Why did we get that license? Is because now there is this interplay between MiCA and PSD2, where stablecoins are defined as funds, which then also fall under PSD2, that would require industry players like OKX, like ourselves, to obtain a payment institution license or an EMI license, which then in itself allow the transfer and holding of stablecoins, which is something that is out of the scope of MiCA. Hence why really OKX, we recently then obtained our payment institution license to ensure that post the March deadline that was set by the EBA, the European Banking Association, that we can continue transferring stablecoins on behalf of our clients.
Okay, very interesting. And you're currently expanding more heavily into Europe in general. Maybe what's special about the European market? Maybe talking about anti-money laundering or maybe other regulatory frameworks there.
The European Union, or the EEA, it's a very large union. It's 450 million people. So in a sense, in terms of when we look into the population, larger than the US, which if I get the numbers right, I think the US is only 380 million. GDP-wise, the US is, of course, much stronger than the European Union in terms of GDP value. But if we compare the two markets, Europe in terms of population is larger. Now, as European, we know in the past, or Europe was quite divided in terms of country regulatory setup. Some countries, when it came to crypto regulation, were quite different from others. Some countries were more advanced. Some countries didn't have the crypto regulation at all. Now, thanks to MiCA, there is this whole harmonization within Europe happening, making sure that all of the member states comply, apply, and abide by the same set of standards that have been defined by the European Union. So in that sense, quite promising. Now, when it comes to competitiveness, because your question is more about the compliance standards, AML, we do believe that also in the US, they're coming up with crypto regulatory frameworks. We do believe that those acts are quite progressive as well when it comes to regulation, but leave a little bit more space for innovation. In Europe, the rules and regulations to comply with are quite strict, quite demanding, quite heavy burden on the users to comply with, but also quite heavy on industry players to make sure that we follow all the right rules and sets of regulations. Now, in a sense, for a large group like OKX with a lot of engineering power and brain power available, it's quite flexible and easy for us to comply with these rules. So in that sense, we're very well positioned to comply with those highest standards on security, safety, compliance. But what we also see, some of our smaller competitors in Europe that only operate on a local level, who do not necessarily have the same engineering and product development capabilities and power. We do feel that there is like a bit of a lack and shortcoming on being able to comply with those highest standards of crypto regulation in Europe. From a competitive point of view, I would say great, but I also would like to have an as open and as competitive landscape in Europe as possible that easily and flexibly allows for new market entrants to come up with new innovative ideas. I really want to promote competition. And I also do believe and feel right now from practical examples that we have already since 1 year operating under MiCA, that some of the smaller competitors find the burden too hard and they are throwing in the towel. So in that sense, for the big players, great, of course, because we do have all the power and technical capabilities to comply. But for smaller players, unfortunately, it will be a difficult uphill battle for them.
Okay, yeah, I think you already said something very important there, because basically MiCA is about harmonizing the standard all in Europe there. And yeah, with the last sentence, you already got into a bit of my next question, that it's about, do you think that innovation is still possible under MiCA, especially when like newer companies, maybe with not that much budget, come there and yeah, basically want to do something innovative?
More difficult because of the high bar of entry in terms of technical requirements, high regulatory standards for compliance, safety, security, which absolutely are necessary and vital for consumer protection. But we see a more, I wouldn't say looser, but a more open approach when it comes to crypto regulation in the other big global financial hubs, like in the US, in some of the Asian markets. It is a little bit less prescriptive and restrictive. So in that sense, I do believe that more of the innovation, and in that sense, it's not only on crypto or blockchain, but also when it comes to AI and all of the other technological advancements that we now see happening. I do believe that in the US and Asia, they're more set up for instilling and promoting future innovation on AI, on blockchain technology, on crypto, on all kind of chip manufacturing and stuff like that. So also to quote it with, I think it was a few weeks ago when the German chancellor in Davos for the World Economic Forum also mentioned and pointed out that Europe is not losing the innovation battle to the US and China because of US and China, but because of its own overregulation and bureaucracy. So come those words from the chancellor of the number one economy in Germany, in Europe, that also makes me hopeful that the European leaders are intimately aware about what has been happening in Europe in the last few years. And I do hope that this is also like a sign and a call out for our law and policy makers across Europe to take it easy on overregulation, because what are we ultimately trying to achieve, right? Like a strong union, strong economical development and growth, which I think under the current setup and heavy load of rules and regulations, I do fear that we are pushing in Europe a lot of the great innovations, a lot of the great employers, companies more outside of Europe.
Yeah, I totally understand. I think innovation, especially in this specific field, is very important. And maybe talking about like crypto exchanges as some kind of competitors against banks, for example, because basically you can withdraw and also deposit crypto coins into the wallet accounts. So how do you realistically see this? Maybe crypto exchanges become a competitor long-term for, let's say, traditional banks, that you can basically create a full account on a crypto exchange?
I think that is inevitable, right? And we see the convergence already happening between the traditional finance industry and crypto. On crypto, the trend that we have been following and also leading in Europe for OKX is providing full-fledged financial services to our consumers. As I earlier mentioned, to pay and to get paid, to accrue your wealth, and to borrow or to lend. Right now, because of regulatory limitations, the borrow and the lend functionalities are still something that is intimately sitting with credit institutions, right? Like there you can openly and widely offer and accrue interest. This is something that is like a phase that is solely dedicated right now for credit institutions. But we also see on the other side, on the traditional finance side, more investment and more interest in the blockchain technology, in crypto. A lot of banks in Europe already offer crypto to or their high net worth or VIP customers. More and more banks are adding Bitcoin and other type of cryptos to their portfolio. More and more banks in Europe are looking and actively exploring blockchain technology for interbanking operations, interbanking movement of funds. Everybody is more and more aware about the benefits of the blockchain technology: open, immutable, instant, free, costless. So it's inevitable that more and more of the traditional financial players will find their way into blockchain and crypto. And of course, on the other hand side, the crypto players, crypto industry and exchanges, they will also start offering more and more wider use cases to their users in order to provide the full financial suite within their services and offers. Interesting trends that are happening now. I think over time, that line between traditional finance and crypto blockchain technology will become thinner. I think ultimately it will end up in one pool of financial service providers.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And maybe last question, as an outlook for 2026, what do you think about maybe the direction of the market going, not only in terms of Bitcoin price, but only in like sentiment and yeah, maybe also innovation?
When it comes to the sentiment, of course, that will be heavy Bitcoin price driven when it comes to retail. The more advanced traders, they are less concerned about the price of the asset. They are trading on daily basis. So as long as there is volatility in the market, there will be definitely interest for more advanced traders. What we now see is as well quite a lot of interest from institutional market players. Before MiCA, crypto was something that institutional players were a little bit more conservative towards in terms of approach, a little bit more wait and see. Now, because Europe legitimized crypto and the digital asset as a financial instrument, we see now a little bit of a hockey stick growth in institutional interest. This is, of course, something that we also heavily cater towards. So right now, since I don't think there will be in the first half of the year a major FOMO on the retail side happening, I do believe that institutionals will heavily contribute to the market sentiment. When it comes to innovation, in your previous question, what I alluded to was more and more traditional finance players adopting the superior blockchain technology. I think it was a couple of weeks ago when it was the CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, who was already since the very beginning of crypto and blockchain probably the number one skeptic on this technology. He also did a 180. He turned around completely. He said it's inevitable that blockchain and crypto technology will rule and take over. It's just so much more superior technology over what we had in the past. Now, if a long-term critic as Jamie Dimon can make a 180, I think that is very telling. I do believe that much more of the traditional finance industry will find its way into this new superior technology. So in that sense, very, very hopeful for the future.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the insights.
Thank you, Phil.